Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof, and this is day 17 of Julian Assange's extradition trial. We're actually almost near the end. We got through a load of statements from witnesses. In fact, after today, we've gone from 10 witnesses to only having 2 witnesses that we need to get through tomorrow. And both of them, in the scheme of things, for people who have been following, probably don't seem that important, so we could call it loose ends. Although critically, we are told we are going to get an update from the defense on the status of the Spanish case that has been brought against Undercover Global, or UC Global, which was involved in the espionage operation against Julian Assange while he was in the Ecuador embassy, targeting him, his visitors, but particularly, as we heard today through witness statements that were submitted anonymously, 2 individuals who worked with David Morales, the UC Global director. These witnesses have submitted their testimony to the Spanish court, and they are now providing it for the purposes of this defense for the effort to convince a judge not to authorize the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States. Let's get to that material. Let's get to this, and good day to everyone out there. It's really good to be speaking with you. The big highlight of today, what's going to be the focus of my written report, what should be the focus of a lot of others' reporting, is the witness statements that were shared, the testimony we heard from someone who was an IT expert for UC Global, somebody who was involved in the installation of cameras and microphones in order to conduct an espionage operation on behalf of U.S. intelligence. We believe that to be the CIA. That has not been confirmed, but however, that is what we believe is the case, that agency was the one that was getting access to the videos and also audio of what was happening inside of the embassy from these cameras that were installed. And initially, we should remember that this company, UC Global, was brought on to do security for Rafael Correa and his family, and to provide a kind of standard security that you would expect at this kind of a diplomatic embassy. And then David Morales decided to take it to the next level. As has been reported, we mostly did not get new information, but what we were able to get was very concrete detail about how this was all done. We know from El País and their reporting in Spain, and we also know from the Gray Zone, work done by Max Blumenthal, a lot about how this all came together. And these witnesses confirm and go into the record as evidence that the judge can consider in making her determination about the authorization of extradition. So to catch people up, if you're unaware, the narrative is basically that David Morales in 2016 takes a trip to Las Vegas, is meeting with people who represent Sheldon Adelson, this tycoon whose company is Las Vegas Sands, and they decide to ink a deal for security for his boat, although it's not for Sheldon Adelson's yacht, because the yacht already has security. There's already a contract for it. And while Morales was supposedly there for a security trade fair, he is working out the terms for this contract that will be the cover for working with U.S. intelligence in targeting this embassy, and returns in 2017, almost right alongside the same timeline for Donald Trump's ascendance to the White House. We have this aggressive ramping up of trying to find whatever information can be gleaned about what Julian Assange is doing. And part of this is to support this pressure campaign to ultimately remove him from the embassy, but also so that the US government can put together their case, figure out how to ultimately bring this to an end so that he is no longer in the Ecuador embassy. And we know that there are two things that are talked about. It's discussed after all of these systems are established for spying that perhaps we'll escalate and kidnap him from the embassy, or maybe we'll poison him in order to bring this all to an end. And so we've got this testimony, and I'll go through some of the statement that was entered into the record, which I understand now the defense has cleared up some misunderstandings, and there was an issue of whether this was public or not, whether there was material in it that could compromise these witnesses that are trying to remain anonymous and not be retaliated against by David Morales. It should be said that they are right now being protected pursuant to a court order in Spain. They have armed protection, and we don't know who they are. So the universe of people who could potentially retaliate against them because they know what they did in exposing and blowing the whistle on this is very small. We know it would have to come from only the people within UC Global who knew these individuals' names, which doesn't give them a whole lot of cover to carry out any kind of acts of violence against them. And so the court agreed to support Spain and keep the anonymity for these witnesses, and they still provided their testimony so that we could have it for the purposes of helping Julian Assange potentially defeat this extradition request. So let me get this up. I just have to figure out which one of the many tabs here that I have had open is it, and here it is. So the witness 2 has by far the most involvement in this operation and came on board with the company in 2015. And some of this may be familiar if you've been following the reporting. So I'll mostly focus on the details that really jumped out to me and spoke to the kind of operation that this person who's the IT expert was being asked to do, and how he or she knew themselves that this was crossing the line. They knew that this was something that should not be done. So it's described here that in June and July of 2017, they were summoned to the headquarters in Jerez. The purpose of the unit was to execute from a technical perspective the capture, systematization, and processing of information collected at the embassy that David Morales requested. So I was tasked with executing David Morales' orders. Again, David Morales is the director of this security company. They were tasked with executing the orders with the technical means that existed in the embassy and additional measures that were installed by order of Morales, in addition to the information gathered by the UC Global employees who were physically present in the diplomatic mission. This unit also had to travel to London every month to collect information. So the team was going to go back and forth and collect this information. The new procedure to obtain information to meet the escalating needs of Morales matched the fact that Trump was now in office, and it was indicated that now Morales believed the contract said they had to change the cameras every 3 years, so they were going to change the cameras. So here's the pretext for swapping them out and going beyond standard CCTV security cameras to cameras that have sophisticated audio recording capabilities so that they could eavesdrop and be used to record sound inside of the embassies. in December 2017, which is a very important month in the timeline of this case, which I'll highlight why that's important, but it's a very important month. In this month, this IT expert, witness number 2, goes to the embassy, installs security cameras, was instructed not to share information about the recording system, and if asked to deny that the cameras were recording audio, they were told it was imperative that they not give any details. This was coming from the highest spheres. That's how they describe it, the highest spheres. In fact, I was asked by Assange and a political counselor named Maria Eugenia whether the new cameras recorded sound, to which I replied that they did not, as my boss had instructed me to do. From that moment on, they're recording sound regularly. We know that in December 2017 is actually when the first sealed indictment was filed, and it's on that conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. And we know that around Christmas, I believe in Christmas 2017, there was an effort to try and see if Julian Assange could leave on that Christmas day with a diplomatic passport, or he had been granted, I think he had been granted citizenship. There was an effort to see if there could be, if he could safely exit the embassy and travel to Ecuador. They ultimately decided their risk was too substantial to make this attempt, but those conversations now, we know, to the extent that they were able to eavesdrop and pick up details, we believe that the government would have known about this meeting as a result of the equipment that was installed here. So that's why this is important, because from that point on, everything that the legal team is doing is targeted. It's pointed out by this witness that the high priority was not just to go after visitors, but to go after the lawyers who were having meetings with Assange, and particularly to go after Baltasar Garzón, who's a former Spanish judge who's on the legal team. And Garzón has a record of interest in challenging the Bush administration on torture, challenging the CIA's involvement in the rendition and detention and torture of people who were terrorism suspects post 9/11, and trying to expose the criminality involved in that program. He's already a noteworthy figure in 2017. They would be interested, and in fact, Morales instructed his team, according to these witnesses, to follow Baltasar Garzón. We know that his office was broken into. There were people in balaclavas that were captured attacking his office, violating his office. And it's known that the measures to go after and neutralize Garzón's involvement in this case were tremendous on the part of UC Global and U.S. intelligence operatives that were involved in supporting that operation. This goes on to detail the fact that this eventually goes beyond just having cameras with recording capabilities. The IT expert says, in fact, Morales wanted me in June 2017 to have streaming capabilities for, quote, our friends in the United States, end quote. And that request alarmed the IT expert that they first said this is not technically possible, but then Morales came back with a PowerPoint that showed how it could be set up, such a system, how it could be set up. And it was clear that since it was in English, that this was likely coming from U.S. intelligence. So then the IT expert had to change their way of discouraging Morales to the basic fact that they believed that Julian Assange would eventually discover the cameras had streaming capabilities. And the IT experts admits there was no evidence whatsoever, but that Morales believing that Julian Assange is a very sophisticated person, would be persuaded that this would be something not to do, to not make a mistake that Julian Assange would be able to detect and find out they were targeting him. So this ultimately made it possible for the streaming capabilities to not be incorporated, and the IT expert never installed it, and it allowed them to not collaborate in what they clearly believed was an illegal act. So and they still believe, and by the way, they challenged the legality of the cameras, of having cameras that were eavesdropping inside of a diplomatic installation. And so then we hear that Morales wants more microphones come January 2018, would like decorative objects to be bugged, would like all of the fire extinguishers, because there's one in almost all of the rooms in the embassy, to have microphones. And the plan was eventually, the plan also was not executed because, again, this IT expert was challenging Morales on the legality of the measures and saying it was illegal. Installing microphones at the scale would be discovered for sure to attempt to dissuade him from carrying out such a crazy act. So ultimately that wasn't, but we have detail about how Garzón had his passport photographed, that they were looking for evidence of travels to Argentina and Russia in his passport pages. It doesn't elaborate as to why they were particularly interested in that evidence, but there has been quite a lot of focus on Russia at this time. Probably they were looking to find ways to discredit him. And as it goes on, it mentions that they were trying to obtain Mr. Assange's fingerprints. They obtained his imprint on a glass used by Assange. There was handwriting. There was a calligraphic analysis that was commissioned by Morales, an analyzation of his calligraphic, the way that he wrote. So there's a lot of stuff here where they were psychoanalyzing what Assange was doing. And as it describes, they're targeting his children, one of his children who was being brought in and out. We know about the plan to steal a diaper from one of Julian Assange's children. At the time, it was not public that this was Julian Assange's child. That Stella Morris's partner is coming in and out, that they increasingly suspect that she might be someone of interest, and they're looking at her closely because of the time she is spending with Assange inside the embassy. But to his credit, Assange is actually very savvy about how he is able to manage this espionage operation being directed at him. He obviously does not know particularly what is being directed at him, but as this witness outlines, in January 2018, they were asked to place certain stickers on the external windows of the embassy. Morales requested that I place them in the top left corner of all the windows. The stickers were rather rigid. They indicated that CCTV was in operation. I found this strange because there had been a closed circuit system for several years, and it didn't make sense to now have to advertise this on the windows of the embassy. Nonetheless, during my visit to London, I placed the stickers that had been supplied in the upper left-hand corner of the windows of the embassy, following the instructions of David Morales. When I returned to Jerez, Morales explained that our American friends had laser microphones outside the embassy, which were directional and pointed at the windows and extracted noise, allowing them to capture all conversations. However, as David Morales stated openly, due to the fact that Assange used a white noise machine, which makes it difficult to obtain sound, that produced a vibration in the window that stopped the sound from being extracted via the laser microphone, which U.S. intelligence had installed outside. Thus, Morales revealed when I returned that those stickers, which were supplied by, quote, our American friends, end quote, had been placed in the upper left-hand side of each of the windows, It eliminated the vibration, allowing the microphones to point to the stickers to extract conversations. I confronted Morales for not having indicated the purpose of placing the stickers. So this is written a bit confusing in his statement, but ultimately, the white noise machine was effective in making it difficult for these stickers to pick up sound. And so we've seen video and heard about this white noise machine being heard. It was being heard when he met with Cassandra Fairbanks, the political activist who works for a conservative media publication, who met with him to warn that in January 2019, she was aware that the Trump administration, because she was on a direct message group with some of these officials, she was aware that they were going to try and throw him out of the embassy, come after and prosecute him for the publications that are at issue in this case now. There were explicit requests from the U.S. There were lists of targets. Again, we keep coming back to this was all about violating attorney-client privilege. It was about finding out what the lawyers and Assange were talking about, getting profiles of the legal team, photographing documents, and also this checkpoint that was at the entrance of the embassy when visitors arrived, where they were taking people's electronic equipment and they were scanning it and violating the privacy of people, taking photos of the insides of these phones, taking photos of SIM cards. This was the very sophisticated operation that was going, or very aggressive operation. I think aggressive might be a better word. I don't know how sophisticated it was, but it was an aggressive operation to target people who were visiting Assange. And it mentions that at the end of 2017, the company learned that Mr. Assange would receive a diplomatic passport from Ecuadorian authorities with the aim of leaving the embassy to transit to a third state. Recall that the security personnel of UC Global deployed at the embassy were closely monitoring the Consul of Ecuador, Fidel Narvaez, who was in charge of the relevant documentation with which he entered and exited the embassy. This is what I was alluding to earlier. I recall Morales saying in the office that the Americans were very nervous. Also, this is a separate event. They were nervous about Dana Rohrabacher, a California representative in Congress who went to meet with Assange in August of 2017. They wanted, the U.S. wanted that to be monitored very closely. So all of these details give us many more specifics about what went on in this operation. And this wasn't the only thing that happened today, but frankly, it is what has most of my attention at the moment, because it is so crucial to, I think, defending Assange from this case, from showing that the due process rights were violated, but also in international law, it's described by a man named Guy Goodwin Gill, who was on the UN, was part of the UNHCR, the High Commission for Refugees, and met with Julian Assange and put together a kind of international legal analysis of what was happening to Julian Assange, and says that the concept is called equality of arms. It's the fact that everyone should have the same equality when it comes to procedures that are outlined in court. Nobody should have an edge over the other. And by violating the confidentiality of Julian Assange and his attorneys, it means that there can be no trial that is fair. The U.S. government will have an edge. They haven't. Well, there may be a wall in this. It hasn't been proven that the information they collected isn't being used by prosecutors, but they like to claim that whatever the U.S. government may have, they are not using for this case. There's ample reason to doubt that, but they claim that it's separate. But let's just take them at their word and say, bottom line, no matter what, the judge knows if they allow Julian Assange to be extradited to the U.S., those agencies that were involved in this operation, this espionage operation, have material that will be used by the Justice Department to go after Julian Assange, to target his weaknesses, and to ensure that they have the upper hand throughout the entire duration of his pretrial and ultimate trial. It might even be used to coerce him into pleading guilty to offenses in order to avoid the publicity of putting Julian Assange on trial. That could be very tough and difficult for them. And so we know that it's just completely unfair, and the judge has this information before her that if she's extraditing him to the United States, she's extraditing him to the US knowing full well he will not have an even playing field to defend himself, and a far less even playing field than what defendants typically would have. That might be unfair. Certainly prosecutors tend to have the edge in these kind of national security cases, but it's even worse in Julian Assange's case, given the systematic targeting of his legal team, which was documented and laid out by these two witnesses. So this is a big part. We had statements that were entered into the record from Noam Chomsky, a statement from Jamil Jaffer, who is with the Knight First Amendment Institute, that went to some of the press freedom issues that we've already delved into in these daily reports. We had Andy Worthington, who I was hoping to get to see provide live testimony, but they agreed on his testimony and the prosecutors no longer had an objection, and he worked on the Guantanamo files. We had testimony entered from someone named Bridget Prince, who did some research, was commissioned to do research and look into the jury pool that would be picked from and selected to potentially review and hear Julian Assange's case. Who would these so-called jury of peers? They wouldn't really be Assange's peers. He's not a U.S. citizen. But also they wouldn't really be anyone that Julian Assange would want passing judgment on him, because they come from a district, an area that is filled with people from military and intelligence and contracting jobs that work for U.S. military and intelligence agencies. They're friends, family, and relatives of these people. So that was entered. This researcher also looked into Sheldon Adelson, as that information might be important for the purposes of contextualizing the UC Global operation. We also had Robert Boyle, who is an attorney that has some done work on the abuses of federal grand juries that are committed, the way in which grand juries are used to target political movements, and how they've been used by prosecutors, and how this was used in order to force Chelsea Manning to testify, to coerce her. Ultimately, she was put in a jail. She was confined for a year. We outlined that this was a way to get some important testimony involving Chelsea Manning into the record and before the judge, to make it relevant and to get her to understand the context of how this case was generated through the grand jury and what makes it so abusive, the way that the charges have originated. So you have a combination here of abusive federal grand jury investigation, and then you also have the espionage operation that was directed at Assange while he was in the embassy, and a total contempt for the institutions of international law, particularly what it means to be granted political asylum, and the violation of sovereignty on the part of Ecuador. Eventually, Ecuador does seem to accede to this, is on board with forcing Assange out of the embassy, but the kind of coercion or the kind of strong arming that likely went on, the bribery or the offers that were made to Ecuador, we haven't seen the cables with this. We should want to see the cables disclosed about these conversations. I suppose it would reveal that if you didn't take the offer that was on the table from the US government, there would likely be consequences for the Ecuador government, no matter what ideology the president had. And we have Moreno is a center-right kind of a politician, not a left-leaning or left-wing president like Rafael Correa, not necessarily the guy you're going to expect to tell the U.S. military you won't allow their base to be built in Ecuador. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean the U.S. didn't use its empire to lord over Moreno and force a certain outcome, which I think that's an important point to be made, that Ecuador didn't have probably a lot of options to protect Julian Assange. If they were going to force Julian Assange out of the embassy, they were going to ultimately succeed in what they were doing because they already had the full support and backing of the UK to take Julian Assange into custody once he was removed from the embassy. So all they need to do is make Julian Assange's life miserable, and then he would exit the embassy. All right, so I need to wrap this up here and get to work on a report, which of course I'll be looking at the UC Global materials and covering that. Although there's not a whole lot new from this, we know that this is something that deserves a lot of attention in coverage. And so let's see. Any questions here before I wrap? I'm just looking at some of the comments you have. I see one question. Given all the incriminating testimony from today's witnesses, why do we need to wait till next year for the judge to make a decision as opposed to seeing the case dismissed right away? My answer is not one that is going to be popular with the crowd that watches this video, but I think we should want the diligence to be done in putting together a decision. I don't think we benefit from wishing the judge would rush. I don't think the defense wants the judge to rush. And the defense actually is responsible for making it so that the decision won't come until 2021. And they were put in a position where, in order to complete their closing argument and to do a really good bundle, to put together a lot of important material in order to complete their defense of Julian Assange, they needed 4 more weeks. And then that means that it's going to take extra time. So she's not really going to have all of the material to make a decision until November. Any of the final arguments that she needs to consider. She can already be working on this case. She can already be drafting her decision. She can already be formulating some of her arguments and as to why she's going to rule how she will rule. But I will say that it's, in fairness, it's good to wait. It's good to have a lot of time. I don't think we should dwell too much on it being longer. Beyond the fact that Julian Assange should be out of jail. Why should he have to be in Belmarsh prison? There's never been a good justification for keeping him there. And so I say that there's nothing wrong with her taking time till 2021, but Julian Assange should be not in jail. He should not be at Belmarsh. If he's going to be on home confinement with electronic tagging, that's much more acceptable and defensible. And it should have been done earlier during the COVID-19 pandemic. It should have been done. Anything else here? I have another question. What do you think about the statements from Noam Chomsky and Patrick Coburn? Do you consider them significant for the defense, and where can we read them? Oh, I think that they'll be circulating soon enough. I may be able to circulate them myself. If not, Tariq Haddad has been posting a collection of the witness statements. And I believe that both of these statements are good because they put the publications into context. They show the revelations and what they meant, why they were crucial. We know that this material that Patrick Coburn talked about came from being a Middle East correspondent. So he describes why it was really important to have a database of material that could confirm the patterns of war crimes that were being committed in Iraq, but also in Afghanistan. He confirms their significance. He speaks to them. Noam Chomsky speaks about the political opinions of Julian Assange, why the United States government has targeted him, and that goes to the part of the treaty that says Julian Assange should not be extradited because he committed a political offense. These are both, and I agree, these are both really good questions. So thank you for them, Serenity. And I have one from Gary. Would Julia's defense be able to have access to any of the surveillance tapes and recordings, or will the prosecution simply use it as leverage? You know, the interesting thing about the prosecution is that they have no involvement or any part in what is going on with UC Global. Everything they're doing with the extradition is out of their control. And this is something that I'm sure is a super drag on their efforts to push forward with the extradition request, to make their arguments. They cannot confirm or deny that what these witnesses are saying is true. The CIA or U.S. intelligence agencies involved don't want that, but then they also don't want to be seen as working on behalf of the United States intelligence agencies. So they're trying to maintain their independence, which means, as they said, they're not able to speak about this material in court. So they're going to try a tactic of saying it's irrelevant to whether Julian Assange committed these crimes. And then when it gets to, should they ever have to deal with this in court, I imagine in the United States during a trial, they would also try the same tactic of saying it doesn't matter to whether Julian Assange committed the crimes, especially since it was in 2010 and 2011 that he published these materials that he was, quote unquote, unauthorized to receive. And so whether he was spied on later shouldn't have any bearing on whether he was engaged in crimes. This is how prosecutors think. Don't worry, I'm not going down that road to the dark side, but I am trying to tell you what they're doing and the fact that they are not involved in this in any way, and they have no control over what's going on with that case. And David Morales could be found guilty in the next months of these offenses. I don't think they will, because the U.S. government is frustrating the Spanish court's ability to collect evidence from people who would have information in the United States about working with UC Global. But he could be found guilty, and they wouldn't be able to do anything about it. That would be something that could work in favor of Julian Assange, certainly on appeal, since that would be new information that could be brought to the attention of a court. They would enter that into evidence that somebody was held accountable for the targeting of the embassy in such a systematic way, and in violating people's rights, going in and out of the embassy and targeting his lawyers. So they have no control over it, and that means that all the recordings, all the scanned photographs, anything that was ever collected that these witnesses turned over, any of the files that they were able to obtain, the Assange legal team has access to this material. And that's partly, I think, why we've been able to learn some important information in the last year or two from El País and the Gray Zone, because this is not something that has to be kept confidential. It can be shared with us all, as shared with everyone as the Spanish court looks over this case. Finally, wouldn't the proof of spying on Assange have an effect on a possible U.S. trial? Yes, it would, and it should. It would, because, in fact, back in 1971, when Daniel Ellsberg was prosecuted, and you can go watch my interview on this channel with Daniel Ellsberg, but back then, 50 years ago, they conducted a covert operation against him. Richard Nixon authorized a political operation against him and broke into his psychiatrist's office. They were trying to target his mental state, and they went after private medical records. And that eventually led to his acquittal, or the dismissal of the case with prejudice. And that meant that effectively they were not able to convict Daniel Ellsberg of any crimes related to the disclosure of the Pentagon Papers. It should be the same in this case, because after all, they are prosecuting Julian Assange like he's a leaker who violated the Espionage Act. And though he's a journalist and we're in unprecedented territory, there is no meaningful difference between how the US government would prosecute a journalist versus how they would prosecute a leaker, or sorry, vice versa. There's no difference here. The only difference is that journalism is protected under the First Amendment as part of freedom of the press. So targeting these news gathering activities has typically been a no-go zone for the US government. And it's something that President Barack Obama's administration recognized back in 2013. And today we find that Donald Trump's administration no longer feels like that is a boundary that isn't to be violated. They see the ambiguity in cases, past cases, as doors that are open for them to walk through and to go after people like Julian Assange. And he's just the first journalist. If this is successful, he is just the first. He will not be the last. There will be other journalists. That is why I have committed myself to covering this case. It's part of the reason why, and it's why I am glad that there are people out there who have engaged in following this case with me. I am tremendously grateful to have all of your support. I need to be wrapping this up. So until tomorrow, which I understand will be the last day, will be my final daily video report on the extradition trial. You can go to dissenter.substack.com for today's written report. If you would like to get that in your inbox, you go to dissenter.substack.com/subscribe and get that emailed to you. It'll also be posted at shadowproof.com. Live updates are at Kevin Gosztola, my Twitter handle, which is over here. And there's the donate link. If you can throw $1 or $2 my way, I appreciate your generosity in ensuring that we can continue to do this reporting and cover this case. Even after we are done with these 4 weeks, there will be much more to do in keeping attention on what is going on with this case against Julian Assange. And so, once again, I couldn't have been effective and wouldn't have reached the kind of audience that I've been able to reach without your support. These last 4 weeks, there's a lot that has happened. And so that brings me to an announcement, which is to say that on October 3rd, we will have a live event. I'm going to be circulating this link now after I get off of here, but it's called Julian Assange's Extradition Trial and the War on Journalism. It's an independent media roundtable discussion that I'm going to be co-hosting with Juan Passarelli, the filmmaker, and he's very graciously decided to commit himself to working on all the technical aspects that need to be handled in order to make sure the stream is functional when we do this on October 3rd. It'll happen for the States. It's going to be pretty early at 8 a.m. Eastern. I don't know that that's correct. But in the morning, it's going to be 8 a.m. Eastern. That's correct. 8 a.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. British Standard Time, and then in the it'll be 10 p.m. for people in Australia. We have this scheduled so that we could reach the global audience that we want to reach and have the most people who are trying to follow this case be able to engage in this live event with us. And you'll see in just a few moments here, all the journalists were gathering to participate in this. And it's going to be an exceptional event, something to ask them about what their takeaways are from this trial. And I'm really excited to be able to do this on Saturday, October 3rd. And then the video will go up and it'll exist. And if you are not able to tune in because it's too early or too late or it's in the middle of the day and you had plans, it will be available to watch afterwards. So don't be too concerned about it. All right, I'm going to go now, and I will be back tomorrow for the final day of Julian Assange's extradition trial. Thank you.